Hello and welcome to today's webinar, E-Signing in Europe, Find New Ways to Use E-Signatures. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Bob Larrabee from AIIM and Jörg Lenz from Kofax. And Kofax from Lexmark is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. As we get started, just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows that are on your screen. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all the widgets that are available to you. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list that's to the right side of the slide area. And there's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about our e-signatures topic today. Feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and that's on the left side of your screen. We will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But feel free to comment or ask for technical assistance if you need. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resource Webinars page in just a few days. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Very pleased to have these two experts with us. Bob Larrabee is the Vice President and Chief Analyst of Market Intelligence at AIIM, and Bob is an expert in the application of advanced technologies and process improvement to solve business problems and enhance business operations. With over 30 years of industry experience, including product management, R&D, marketing, sales, and education, his passion is to share his knowledge and experience with organizations seeking to improve their operations, embrace technology, and drive their business forward. And Jörg Lenz is the Product Marketing Manager at Kofax from Lexmark, and he's based in Germany. He has 17 years of experience in digital transformation and a particular deep understanding of e-signature and payment processes. He was and is heavily involved in the evolution of the corresponding products at Kofax, the Kofax DocSign for e-signing, Kofax SignDoc for e-signing, and Kofax Fraud One for check fraud prevention. Jörg facilitates the synergies of these signature products with other Lexmark solutions, as well as partners integrating SignDoc and Fraud One into their solution stack. So as we actually begin into the presentation today, we just wanted to give you a brief overview of what Bob and Jörg will be discussing with us today. And we are going to open this conversation in just a moment talking about the terminology, just have some base understanding of the definitions, and that'll so you can have that in context for the rest of the talk today. And then we will be discussing operational challenges, the risk and business requirements, and the opportunities for using e-signatures. And we're certainly going to be identifying some starting points and list out some considerations, legal and otherwise, because there are some legal considerations, most certainly, and regulatory as well. And then we'll be talking a little bit about next steps and some resources for you. We do have a lot of really good resources at hand. And some of those are in that list to the right side of your slide. So feel free to click on those, and that'll open in a new tab for you. And you can finish downloading those and have those copies to take with you after the webinar. So right now, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about terminology, and I'm going to ask Jörg to come in here, and since you have been very involved with the e-signatures conversation, especially in Europe, just wanted to have you start off, Jörg, by talking about the definitions for these terms we see on the screen right now.
Yeah, Teresa, thanks for the introduction. And of course, one of the major challenges whenever you talk about signatures, electronic signatures, is to have a same understanding of signature terms. And we do have people from around the world joining this webinar, not only from Europe, but also South Africa, Australia, and also, of course, from the Americas. So you may come from different backgrounds and different terminology definitions. So that's why we look at this up front in order to establish a joint understanding. Digital signature, this is a technical term describing a method to create an electronic signature based on cryptography. The folks in the US may know that back in 1997, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, was one of the first ones to define what actually a digital signature is. And this has become sort of a commonplace A digital signature is an electronic signature based upon cryptographic methods of originator authentication, computed by using a set of rules and a set of parameters, such that the identity of the signer and the integrity of the data can be verified. So if you look into European regulation, you may not find the term digital signature, but you'll find electronic signature. That's a legal term. It was defined in Europe in Regulation 910 from 2014. And you can see the abbreviation AIIDAS on the slide. That's an acronym for Electronic Identification and Signature. The full title of this regulation is on electronic identification and trust services for electronic transactions. So besides electronic signatures, trust services also include electronic seals, timestamps, electronic delivery services, and website authentication. In European terms and definitions, an electronic signature is data in electronic form attached to or logically associated with other electronic data, which are used by the signatory to sign. But there's a specific term. A signatory is a natural person creating an electronic signature. There's another term on this slide, electronic seal. That's an electronic equivalent to a seal or a stamp of a legal person, applied on a document to guarantee its origin and integrity. These kind of electronic seals are often called also technical signatures, as they're typically applied in batch mode in mass signing. In this webinar, we will primarily look at electronic signatures created from signatories, natural persons. You can find two links on this particular slide. As you have heard, you can download it already. And in the additional assets, we have a little bit of background on the terminology, including two other pieces on this slide, advanced electronic signatures. They are uniquely linked to the signatory, and they must fulfill certain requirements, once again defined in the EU regulation. So they must be capable to identify the signatory, created using a signature creation data that the signatory can, with a high level of confidence, use under his sole control, linked to the data. So in other words, advanced electronic signature is not the generic term that is floating around. It is defined in laws and regulations, for example, under AIIDAS, and our folks from South Africa know that they have a definition for advanced electronic signatures in their laws as well. Qualified electronic signatures are basically advanced electronic signatures, but they are created with a qualified electronic signature creation device. And they're based on a qualified certificate. And this certificate is issued by a qualified trust service provider. So three components: a creation device, a certificate, and a trust service provider is involved. Qualified electronic signatures are only required in some use cases in some countries. We'll touch this later. First, I'll hand over to Teresa because we want to have a look at what your interest is about. So we'll go for some polls, and this is the click to some poll questions, and Teresa to pick up from your end.
Thanks, Jörg. And so just wanted to ask you, everybody, just to step up to your keyboards here and just answer this first question for us. And it's going to help let our speakers to get a little understanding of where you are and what is the status of your e-signing adoption in your organization. Are you exploring options? Do you have a plan and budget in place? And have you already deployed e-sign technology and just want to expand further? So just let us know which one of these best suits where you are in your e-signature adoption. And we're going to take a quick look at what the answers are right here in just a second here. And Jörg, is this the kind of response that you're seeing? I see it's a mix between people exploring and that they already have it deployed.
So we are looking on a mixture between those that are new to the topic and some of those that already have had their fair share of experience. So this is exactly what we were looking for, to get an idea of how we balance the content that we are providing in the upcoming minutes. So we may opt for the next particular survey.
Yeah, and this second question here is, which business processes are you most interested to further automate with e-signatures? And you can click all that apply, and you scroll down on the view here to see all the options. We have customer onboarding, consumer loan or mortgage origination, e-contracts, internal approvals, human resource processes, or if there's just some other operation in your organization that you're looking to apply e-signatures to. And go ahead and check those that apply for you as well here. And then I'm actually going to ask Bob Larrabee to join in. And we're going to take a look and see what our audience members are saying here as to which of these and how people would like to be using e-signatures. And Bob, your thoughts on what we're seeing in here compared to what you're seeing in all of the survey work that you've done here at AIIM.
Well, thanks, Teresa and Jorg, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's really quite interesting. 72% of the folks that we polled just a moment ago said that they're exploring this use of e-signatures, and here we're seeing 61% saying that they're focusing or they're most interested on things like internal approvals and e-contracting for 53%. So it's actually in line, I would say, with a lot of the things that we're seeing at AIIM, especially the idea of approvals, the review and approval cycles and processes, especially when we're trying to move away from a more physical world into the more digital world to make that transformation step away from the paper-based information and signatures into the more digital. And so, what I would say for the most part is these are standard operational challenges. They're very similar for many businesses, regardless of what business you're in. It could be finance, it could be healthcare and so on, or insurance. The challenges really boil down to, long processing times, delayed response times, slow review and approval processes, and poor accessibility and sharing capabilities within the organization. And so, these are things I see that are very common across various businesses. And long processing times, it could be anything. It could be loan processing in a bank. It could be insurance application processing and so on. So, Jorg, I'm kind of curious, in your world, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, you've listed the operational challenges in general, and I think we'll have to tie them in with the operational goals typically linked to e-signing projects. So with everyone in the audience at the moment, it might make sense if you have a look on these typical, most experienced, typical 5 operational goals, and you'll have your own priority ranking. You may drop one or the other, and you may add another one for. Such a priority ranking is important to identify the priority of requirements and goals of your e-signature projects and to have efficient conversations with solution vendors. So if you look on internal processes, your requirements to stay compliant may be less strict than if you are having a customer-facing or a partner-facing scenario. We will not dig into every little detail in this webinar. So some of the slides you see, like this one, should be a starting point for your own, let's say, project starters. And these days, these goals are also related to overall strategies in a corporate, like digital transformation, digital transaction management, or digitization. So keep in mind that if you think about paperless signing, that this may have to do with an overall digitization strategy. Mm-hmm. These signature goals and challenges, they may be split into the interest of those folks in green, that's the organization here on the slide, and the folks in blue, the customers, sometimes also the partners. Our hint is to get specific as early as possible so you identify the goals and challenges based on the use cases you really want to address. So there is one question around e-signature projects that we may emphasize in this webinar several times. Who signs what, where, when, why, how? And if you just answer that sort of little question, you'll get the full scope. What you want to achieve is user adoption, users, maybe customers, those folks in blue, but also your own employees and your channel partners. From our experience, adoption is driven if a process is seen as sufficient for the purpose. So if you think about human resources processes, you're an employee of the organization, so you may be more comfortable with just a basic click to sign process, whereas if you are a customer and are signing something important, a contract, this may not necessarily be the most suitable approach. Signing a contract to purchase a car or paying for a life insurance is something that correlates with classic signing ceremonies, something really important. So there's a psychological component. We list here the signature challenges, and the psychological aspect is an important one. Sales guys know this as Mont Blanc moment, when the heavy ball pen touches paper to sign with wet ink. The good news is that you can create these important signing moments without wet ink, and we'll cover that soon. Now over to Bob for a reality check, where businesses stand mid-2016, and Bob has latest figures from AIIM research.
That's right. Thank you. And actually, this is from the report we just released this week on paper-free. And we basically asked which of the following would describe your office. You know, what is your organization? And in relation to signing, on a global scale, 65% are still signing on paper. In Europe, this drops to about 53%. But the point remains that, you know, paper is still king, and wet ink signatures in this particular case is really the approach that's taking place here. And that's one of the main drivers for paper use. And when we took that a little bit further, we asked why. You know, why do you think paper is still in play? 30% of the people that we heard from globally said that physical signature is a requirement. And in Europe, 35% said the same thing. So, you know, why look to e-signatures? You know, physical signatures clog the process, presents risk of lost information. They're less secure than physical signatures, but yet folks are still going to the physical aspect of this. And so I'm kind of curious, Jörg, you know, especially where we're hearing things like physical signature is a requirement. And we know that there are things like AIIDAS and so on. So what do you think?
We still need physical signatures on paper. That's if you start about and digging into that one, this is really the impression of many potential users. And if you look into AIIM surveys in the recent years, I think I'm following this one for the last 12 years. This has been very stable, and one of the major objections is the fear that e-signing might be less secure than paper-based signing. Let's make the reality check with your paper-based process, and we just cover 4 aspects over here. This is an initial checklist where things may go wrong and where operational risk actually happens in classic paper-based signing workflow. Mm-hmm. This initial checklist ought to be adjusted based on your use cases and fraud risks. So we will provide you with a link to assess also operational risk around e-signing with 6 steps as part of the assets provided in this particular webinar. So first takeaway is, do not only look on what you think that may happen in an e-signing process, also assess your process today. And why are you actually signing? So this is another interesting question. As you remember, the key question for signature projects: who signs what, where, when, why, how? This slide deals with the why. In most cases, documents are signed for the purposes of evidence and conclusiveness, so the primary purposes. Evidence may be achieved in various ways. Could be the signing process itself, but also corresponding technologies. For example, recording of the location. So if you sign something on a smartphone or on a tablet, we may track the GPS coordinates if suitable, or time, using timestamps. Timestamps from your computer or from a third-party trusted timestamp service. So first, over again to Bob, as you've got some insights on prime opportunities for e-signing, and then we dig into use cases.
Mm-hmm. And this really, there are a lot of prime opportunities to look at, and as we said, a lot of folks are exploring this potential of e-signatures. But when you look at the industries, finance, banking, insurance, healthcare, whatever the case might be, there is some prime opportunities there. Review and approval processes, contracts and agreements, which actually is reflected in the polls that we took just a few minutes ago. And so I think it really does boil down to, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are your goals? And how do you want to approach this? And so, I'm kind of curious, with what you're seeing, how does this align to what we're hearing?
So let's sort this out a little bit in more detail. Around the prime use cases, and first message is there is no one size fits it all. However, there are platforms that can cater for the various requirements. And so with regards to the use cases, there are similarities across industries. So we have participants joining us today from banking, insurance, telecommunication services, and they all deal with onboarding scenarios, whether it's employees or whether it's customers. For all those, well, this list is far from being complete. We intend just to highlight the major use cases. Within an organization, you may look at different use cases facing customers or employees. So for the purpose of this particular webinar, we just have a look at one particular use case because it's a more complex one. It's the consumer loan origination. And the intention is to pick up some inspiration from real life cases now. So that's one that's already in production for quite a while, and it gives some good explanation on how e-signatures can be adopted. This use case deals with a specific signing scenario, signing in person, in branches of retailers to finance purchases, for example, for new furniture. Growing business by minimizing time to finance for partners in retail and their customers was the major operational goal. So if you think about the 5 goals we had before, why did this project start? Because of reducing time to finance. This particular use case has inspired many other organizations to go for similar approaches for other use cases as well, such as account opening processes in banking, insurance, and telcos. This case reflects that the point of sales or point of contract today is not necessarily linked to brick and mortar, to a branch or an office of a finance organization. So to speak in other terms, the point of sale is where the tablet or where the smartphone is, and it could be in person. It could be a remote point of sale. It may be at a pop-up booth of a promotional team. So think about the telco company or the energy provider in a shopping center. And it could be shop-in-shop concept. Here we have a shop-in-shop concept. In this case, Chatelaine is providing its services within IKEA stores. And in cases, let's say inspired by this one, home improvement contract loans are assigned by consultants, and they are at home and just doing some sort of review of what can be improved. So, quick before and after look. A good point typically is to access the particular before and after. I might have been clicking a little bit too fast. So before an e-signing solution like the one at Chatelaine was up and running, time to finance took 2 to 3 days or even longer. But this is not 2016. Today you're expecting something done in minutes and no longer in days. However, many organizations still run that kind of process, and it could be even more complex than what you see here on the screen. Print, send, scan processes, and sometimes also, well, wherever there is a switch from paper to digital, this is a source of errors. At Chatelaine, the process is digital end-to-end, and time to finance is down to minutes. Several car financing organizations across Europe, they also have achieved the same digitization levels for vehicle loans. And that's currently one of the very hot topics. Around AIIDAS now, many organizations are looking, can they do this on a European level with maybe different ways of e-signing, because in some countries they're obliged to use qualified electronic signatures. In other countries, they aren't. So they do not need to go for the maximum technical approach if they're not obliged to. They can, but they do not need to. So I hope this was a little bit of inspiring, and we tried to take signature serious. And now, Bob, where to begin from your perspective?
Very insightful. I think you're right. When you talked earlier about we really have to determine what the scope is. We have to make determinations, and is it going to be global? Is it local? Is it departmental, enterprise-wide? What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? And really look at the processes and identify, how the process functions, where the content is touching that process, but also where the signature actually occurs or where it could occur. And this gets back to what you mentioned before is, we have to look at the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, the how, all of those different elements in relation to the signatures and the process itself. And so, based on that, what do you see as the signing process, and the orchestration of all of this?
So to all those that are attending this live or seeing this now in a recording, you do not have to digest the full infographic that you see in front of you on the spot. This one is that e-signing and e-signature creation typically is part of a whole process. So whether it's evidential weight or the acceptance by a customer, please don't look at e-signing as an isolated thing. So this orientation graphic shows different methods to create electronic signatures. So that's in the green box sitting underneath, and it depends on the particular process environment. So sometimes also referred to as the signing scenario. And under AIIDAS, the EU regulation, many people tend to focus first on the so-called remote signing. My point is that if you think about loan and mortgages, like 15.4% of our participants, and onboarding, and also e-contracting, which had 53% of interest. Where is it actually happening? So this is the key question. Are you signing a mortgage typically as a remote thing or in person? And this has a major impact on what kind of e-signing method is approved or adopted. The other thing is, besides user adoption, which is sometimes the major hurdle, it is the compliance to legal and technical requirements. This is depending on the use case, but also on the country and the industry. So to give you an example, if you intend to enable new customers to open a new banking account remotely, you have to comply with dedicated rules on authentication. The buzzword is multi-factor authentication, and it's based on the requirements of knowing your customers. And it doesn't help to look only on the EU regulation on electronic trust services. You ought to know something else: the Anti-Money Laundering Directive, the Payment Service Directive, and implementing regulations on assurance level for electronic identification. You do not have to learn this by heart at the very moment, but the idea is that there are corresponding regulations, sometimes on a multinational level, on the European level, sometimes on a national level, and sometimes by industry. So back from the specific example to the generic perspective. But in terms of consideration, what are your recommendations if we just go for a high-level bullet point list?
Well, of course, the legal requirements in the EU, which you've touched on, but also I think the complexity and the risk of it all. What level of complexity is there, and what risk, if any? And we talked about the idea of compliance, as regulatory, legal requirement, and in some cases industry requirement that may go along with that. And then, of course, user preferences and expectations. And you mentioned change management being an issue. Change management is one of the biggest challenges, regardless of technology. It really is one of the biggest challenges. And the idea that there's this certain expectation, sometimes it amazes me because we're willing to do things in our personal life we may not want to do in our business life. And there's this barrier. So we have to anticipate objections as well. that people are comfortable with the way they're doing things. They're not necessarily comfortable with this way of doing things. And we have to anticipate that there's going to be some type of objection there and some change management efforts, to get people and get the culture to think a little bit differently. So I'm kind of curious, when we look at these things and break them down legally, what do we have here in your view?
Yeah, Bob, you sound like you have listened to one of the rare video podcasts when people like Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, she has covered the topic of electronic signatures in her mid-September video podcast. And she said that the reluctance is not only among potential users, but also among lawmakers to dig into what electronic signatures actually can deliver today. Now, there are some surprises for those new to the subject. If you want to detect signature requirements imposed by laws, you have to think the way that lawyers think. So if there is no particular legislation that obliges you to go for a particular electronic signature method, you're free to choose whatever you want to do. And this is one of the basic surprises. You'll have to look, based on your use case, into national, civil, or commercial law. There may be regulations set up by supervisory bodies or industry associations. And the great surprise for those new to the world of signatures, for many use cases, you may not find such requirements for validity or enforceability. So you're free to pick whatever you want to like. For example, there are no signature requirements for broker proxies or consultation minutes in most European countries. Why are they still signed very often with wet ink on paper? Well, many organizations, they just want to have some sort of evidence. So that's the reason why they stick with paper. But for evidence, you don't need paper. That's maybe probably one of the takeaways. Next takeaway. Most common objections. But when we prepared this particular webinar, we were spending a lot of thoughts on recent AIIM studies and when we are at conferences, wherever on the globe, and what are the typical objections? So the Q&As from recent webinars that we had on electronic signatures with AIIM. And that's kind of a top 6 list. You may or may not see yourself reflected. It starts with, okay, so electronic signatures are not as secure as wet ink signatures. This may be based on your previous experience. When you receive a parcel and sign for a receipt on a courier services device, okay, this may not have been the most convincing e-signature experience. You may have signed with Donald Duck or whatever Donald you like, but this was not necessarily a trustworthy electronic signature. So there are ways to e-sign which is considered trustworthy. So think about handwritten signatures, if they are captured and used, if they are captured with the invisible biometric signals of time, location, and pressure levels, that's a different story than just having something signed on any kind of capturing device. So you can take this sort of means of authenticity serious. E-signed documents should contain an audit trail indicating who signed what kind of content when. And that audit trail ideally is part of the signed document so that you do not have to go for any kind of validation service. E-signing can be combined with digital certificates. Sometimes it must be because you'll have to apply particular forms of electronic signatures like qualified electronic signatures. But there is no automatism that says that for an advanced electronic signature, per definition under European regulation, you must use a digital certificate. You must use for a qualified one. You may also remember our assessment, our initial 4 points on operational risks for paper-based signing processes. You saw that slide a few minutes before. So don't go only for the approach for the e-signing stuff. Next thing, I think I must capture signatures on paper. Are you really sure? In many cases, the necessity for a signature is based on customs and common practice, just to show evidence of a transaction. So where signing on paper is not a de jure requirement, any electronic signature can be used instead of applying ink on paper. National laws may restrict legal effect of some documents, for example, just to qualified electronic signatures or advanced electronic signatures. An example, well, consumer loans in Germany, Switzerland, you'll have to sign them with qualified electronic signatures. In Italy, an advanced electronic signature is sufficient. In several European countries, you are free to choose what kind of e-signature you want to use. Only a few typical business processes are totally excluded from e-signing, and presumably only a few or maybe no one attending this webinar is primarily interested in life annuity commitments, suretyships, or promises to fulfill an obligation. So that's not the typical mass market. Face-to-face and face-to-face signing, and we cannot use e-signing. Well, this may be because you know cloud-based services and processes and workflow orchestration that deals with e-signing, not in face-to-face scenarios. Trustworthy e-signing is executed face-to-face for more than 10 years in banking branches, so for mission-critical stuff. So this is not something completely new, and it can be orchestrated in a way that it's not something tweaked just from a cloud-based or SaaS-based solution that initially was meant for an email or web-based initiated workflow. ROI. Some organizations really struggle to identify their ROI because the data points for it are scattered around the organization. Cost savings, as AIIM has listed several times, are typically printing, storing, preparing, signing, routing, shipping, scanning, indexing, and physical archiving. So you may ask folks such as Kofax to provide you with an ROI calculator so that you can calculate on your own if you can also come up with sample numbers for your organization. Just to give you an idea, as a German finance industry, they calculate with a savings potential of €2.50 per document in account opening processes for the many documents that are signed in Spanish savings banks organization. One particular savings bank typically sees to achieve an ROI within 11 months after implementation. Number 5 is closely linked to number 4. If you do not know what you can save, and if you do not have a gut guess of how many opportunities you've lost to close a deal, then it may become low priority, or because you just have the gut guess that embarking on an e-signing project ruins your career. It doesn't. I'm in this space now for 19 years, and I don't think it has completely ruined my life. But based on our experience, it's a matter of fact that the ROI was not calculated, and you do underrate the danger of walkaway customers. So for example, insurance. Sales agents, they do not want to have their customers shopping around for an even better deal after they've done detailed consultation. So they just want to close the deal on the spot. And a similar situation if you want to open a telco account, etc. So the time to finance is really a very crucial aspect, not only for insurance, banking, and telcos. Finally, it is far too complicated. Okay, true for the past. E-signing was complicated, in particular in some countries in Europe. And I'm out of Germany, and we tended to over-engineer and over-regulate the stuff, honestly. But that has changed with the AIIDAS regulation because some over-regulations are no longer taking place. So you might have experienced hurdle in the past. If you need to create a qualified electronic signature, you had to own a signature creation device, typically a smart card reader in combination with smart card. Then you'll have to apply for the necessary certificates, typically at a physical registration office. We call this over here post-ident, and I think it was the yellow ident in Switzerland and similar in various other European countries. Meanwhile, you can go for remote identification scenarios and authentication scenarios. So where it is required, the EU regulation AIIDAS opens doors for so-called cloud signing services without the need to own a signature creation device. So if we talk about new ways to e-sign, even if a qualified electronic signature is required, there are means for electronic identification and authentication which can be tied into the process. So these are the final takeaways on 6 typical common objections, and we'll head over to Bob for common pitfalls.
But that's a lot of information, a lot of great information. And you know, one of the things that we see, some of the common pitfalls in relation to all of this is actually determining the level of integration that might be needed. The idea of e-signing becoming a siloed application. And that's a big challenge too, because just like any other technology, the possibility of this becoming a siloed application, not used cross-departmental or enterprise-wide. Documenting the actual business requirements too. And this gets back to not necessarily functional or technical requirements, but what is the actual business requirement? That we need to capture signatures, as you were saying, in the field. Maybe we're trying to land that insurance account or that telco account and so on. So the requirement is we need to get that customer to sign right then and there on the spot. And of course, understanding the legislation and its impact. You know, what is the impact? And as you mentioned, sometimes there's room for interpretation, sometimes there isn't. And then, of course, the ultimate challenge and pitfall is underestimating user reluctance. The fact that we're going to put this technology out there and we believe that it's going to function extremely well, but the user looks at it and says, yeah, I'm not really that sure about this. And so I'm not necessarily going to be on board with this right away. So these are some of the common pitfalls that we see at AIIM. And so, you know, keeping that in mind and looking at e-signatures, the overall part of digital transformation, how do you see this playing out?
Well, one of the pitfalls, and also in terms of reluctance for adoption, is that you haven't had a look on where e-signatures are sitting in your process. The close synergies with mobile ID, document composition, capture, preservation, workflow processing, as well as data integration. For example, when it comes to compare rates prior to the contracting stage. So one takeaway, make sure that your e-signing solution is capable to play with those corresponding solutions as well. So this avoids another pitfall. The other thing is just consider deployment and integration options. The pros and cons for both types of deployments, cloud or on-premise. So for example, your deployment decision has an impact on how you handle privacy and data residence. There is another EU regulation to be kept in mind for this, the General Data Protection Regulation, abbreviated GDPR. And so that's another aspect. In terms of digesting these slides, depending on your particular scenario, you may choose to go for a deep integration and run something on-premise. Or if you just look for a department solution in the first stage, you might want to choose from the vendor just to pick the already existing e-signing workflow orchestration suite and run this on a cloud basis. So we don't dig into this into all details in order to get to Q&A relatively fast. So I'll just give over to Bob in terms of where to begin.
Well, the way I see it, and especially, you know, where this is largely the European community that we're talking with today, although, as you pointed out, we do have some global presence as well, I think really what it comes down to is to learn and understand what the regulation really is, you know, and identifying the impact and the challenges that the organization might face as a result of these things. You know, can we do these things? How do we do these things? What is appropriate? And if we're multinational, what does that also mean? So beyond Europe, you know, a lot of organizations might be in the EU, but they might also have dealings beyond the EU. And so when we talk about enterprise-wide deployment, I think that's part of it as well, not just understanding the European regulations, but also looking beyond that when it comes time to expand. I think mapping and documenting the signature process as well. You know, what is the purpose? What are the associated documents, and what is the signature activity related to this? And it always gets back down to what I say is look at the process, understand how things function, understand the purpose and the value of it. And then, of course, identify what the level of process security is and what's the need or the need for evidential weight. You talked about this a little bit earlier, Jorg, that, sometimes it's not necessarily evidential weight for legal reasons as much as it is for our own reasons, to validate and show that, yes, in fact, somebody did sign for this. And then, of course, governance. Governance, I think, is one of those things where a lot of organizations miss the mark. They don't really talk about governance. And so establishing governance policies and an e-signature framework for the corporation, I think that's a big thing, and setting up the rules and the foundation for it. And, of course, developing what I would call true business requirements and, the functional requirements that go along with that. And so in short, what I'm seeing is basically this. In our personal lives, we are pretty much willing to e-sign anything. Yet in our business lives, we're very reluctant to do this. And I see that it's time now to take that first step and bring e-signing capabilities into the information ecosystem. I mentioned earlier, we just released our paper-free report. And the world is moving more toward a digital business environment, away from paper. In order to do that, we have to bring these e-signing capabilities into the fold. We have to make that part of the information ecosystem, if you will, in order to truly become paper-free and less reliant on the paper aspects of things. And so those are kind of my thoughts in relation to that. So,
yeah, well, AIIM is celebrating the World Paper-Free Day on November 4th again, and
yes.
So this is, of course, one of those remarks to, if you think for yourself, we are all typically also customers, and we are typically all employees. And if we interact with our own organizations and with the companies that we're dealing with, most of us are using 3 of those devices seen here, like a desktop computer, like a tablet, like a smartphone, a phablet, etc. And what we want to do is we want to get things done. It's not necessarily that we just only want to e-sign something, but we want to get the thing done. So in terms of, this is the expectation. Yep.
If I may, I think this is an extremely important slide, because one of the things that you pointed out a little bit earlier was the aspect of face-to-face. And people feel that they use paper because they deal in a face-to-face world. And today, with these mobile devices, especially what you're showing here, we can do this in a digital sense. We don't have to rely on the paper for that face-to-face interaction anymore.
And for all those that are still struggling a little bit with, let's say, technological e-signature approaches, if you stick to a particular habit that's well adopted, this is one option to lower the barrier to move into the digital world. It doesn't necessarily say that you need to sign with handwritten signatures everywhere, but with regards to in-person signing, this is the closest paper-like e-signing scenario. So let's say the enemy is not the ink and handwritten signature, it is just the paper. That's why we also typically try to make a difference between, we do not need to get the handwritten signature out of your digital process. You can even embrace it if you want to. So with regards to options to dig into more details, e-signatures and terminology are different around the world. We've created a ebook that is listing the various laws around the world, including also interpretations around operational risk assessment. It was just updated a few days ago. And another thing updated a few days ago, worked in collaboration with Bob in March this year, and now available in multiple languages. So if you rather would like to read this in Italian, Spanish, or French, feel free to reach out. You'll see some links, and the Italian and Spanish one will be available soon. So, in terms of questions and answers, that's what we're hopping on soon. Feel also free to direct me to contact me directly after this webinar, to follow on Twitter, follow on LinkedIn, and of course to access the Kofax website, a company that is now within this space for more than 20 years based on previous acquisitions. I was part of one of that. So I can hand over, I think now to Teresa or Bob, who is doing a little bit of teasering on the latest white paper.
Yes. Well, actually, Bob, you're the research guru behind this. Would you talk a little bit about the new paper-free research report that just came out this week?
Oh, I'd be happy to. It's really insightful. Some of the things that we've uncovered, we talked about a little bit here today. But the idea of being paper-free, there's more and more, what we're finding is there's less paper at the door, so to speak, and more digital. So things like invoices, multi-channel inbound has truly become multi-channel in the sense that, yes, paper may still exist, but less and less. And so emails, capture by phone, and signatures, as we've been talking about this morning, are all coming at us in a digital form. And so the paper-free report, we kind of explored that, and we're finding that, yes, while there isn't hockey stick activity, where we're going from 0 to 100 in 5 minutes or 5 seconds, there is a steady march toward being completely digital. And one of the things that we're seeing is, especially in new businesses are being created in the digital world, and they're starting from scratch that way, which means there's increased competition for existing organizations, people who are struggling with paper. And you really can't afford to function at the speed of paper anymore in business. You can't. You have to function at the speed of digital transactions, which means right here, right now, we can capture what we need and we can move the process forward. So capture early, capture as far up front in the process as we possibly can. So a lot of great information in this report this year.
Well, something you just mentioned there, Bob, strikes me. Jörg had mentioned earlier when he was talking about the obstacles and those challenges, and Jörg had mentioned earlier with calculating ROI that a lot of companies aren't even necessarily recognizing the lost opportunity. And what you just mentioned about young companies now, innovative startups, they're being born and live fully in a digital world, and these are the competitors. Jörg, is that what you're seeing with the types of companies that you're working with?
Absolutely. You'll see a lot of fintechs, and if you look on the also from the competitor landscape around e-signing, of course there are big companies, most of them based in the United States, but there are local heroes, just whether it's in the Nordics, whether it's in Italy or in Spain, and they're doing a good job, and they are addressing specific segments. So specific segments mean that they sometimes offer one or two e-signing methods, and they are good in their e-signing capabilities. They are a little bit limited in terms of the synergies with other aspects of digital transformation. So this is probably something that one can keep in mind when embarking on a signature project. If you just have to solve an immediate problem, or if you are seeing e-signing as part of your long-term strategy. And so think about banks. On the one hand side, they have the remote customer applying for a low-level consumer loan, and that may be even executed over the smartphone. But that's the same customer that does an account opening and may even still write checks. So in the United Kingdom, for example, we are still having more than 200 million checks issued annually. So the customers are not automatically always using electronic signature means. They are behaving in a hybrid mode like we ourselves. So this is something that needs to be kept in mind, that the sort of digital transformation moves at different speeds. And it does not necessarily have to do with age, because there are people aged something like 65. Even my father is very active smartphone user and wants to get things done there. And there are other 20-somethings. They are having some sort of fear of the digital world, and they just do not do online banking at all because they're not comfortable based on their perception.
And it's interesting too, because you're talking about banking, and there's a bank here that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure that they're global, but Ally Bank, which is online only. There are no branches. You can't find one. There is a corporate headquarters where all of the servers and things are stored, but this is a case of a startup creating and really disrupting the industry in a sense, because their overhead costs are much lower than traditional banks. And so it really,
of course,
really
and they do a good job in mass marketing, as you can, or in the mass stuff that needs to be signed. Like, for example, if it's just a sort of electronic signature seal that is required. So the more consultancy is required around a particular process. And it makes sense if you are accessing specific analyst reports. For example, consumer loan origination, PwC, is having a look at that one. And where is actually the consulting happening? Is this also something that is done in person? And we'll see this also with life insurance, partially health insurance and accident insurance, that this is still done in person. So the contracting is also done in person, whereas other stuff, you and I and many that are attending this webinar may be absolutely comfortable in doing this on a remote basis and just having something like an I agree button to click on it and getting stuff done. So this is, I think, the important factor, that the fintechs are eating away some parts of the traditional retail banking market. And if you are a banker or someone in the insurance company or also in a telco, then you'll have to think what kind of field is attractive for you, especially in the time of low interest rates. So savings accounts is currently something that is not that attractive. Consumer loans is something that seems to be attractive because you still can get some sort of margin out of that business.
Well, thank you. We've been listening to Jörg Lentz from Kofax and Bob Larrabee from AIIM. And I just wanted to mention to you, Jörg mentioned World Paper Free Day that is coming up on Friday, November 4th. And invite you to come over and go to AIIM.org / World Paper Free Day, the WPFD. I'm stumbling over my own words here. When you download a copy of the slides, this slide will, the PDF, it will link over to that page for you. Come over and listen to that. Bob will be giving a lot of highlights of the research, much more in depth than what he's even covered today. And we're also going to hear stories from heroes, people who have been succeeding in working with less paper in their business and how they've been doing it, and just give you some even more ideas on how to do that. So encourage you to come over to the World Paper Free Day. And then also just wanted to let you know that the reminder that the resources that Jörg had listed on his slide, and also the link to that paper, the latest paper-free industry watch research that is available to you in that resources list, that is to the right side of your screen. Please take a opportunity to download that and have that for your convenience there. And just want to also remind you that this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available in the next day or two on the resources webinars page on the AIIM website. And also, just to let you know that when we do end the webinar, a little survey is going to pop up on your desktop for you. I value your feedback, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few moments to complete that survey, tell us how we did today, and also suggest other topics for us to cover. Very much want to thank our underwriter, Kofax from Lexmark. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs. So thank you very much, Kofax, for your contributions to AIIM and to the industry. And as we do bring the webinar to a close, I just want to ask each of our speakers for a closing thought or a key takeaway. Now, I'd like to start first with Jörg Lenz from Kofax. Your closing thoughts today.
Well, there is just one thing. Why wait? Of course, we try to be a pathfinder with these particular slides. So the best idea is to familiarize, download, discuss, and then ask the specific questions based on your use case. So then we can investigate the best approach so that you can move away from wet ink signing to the suitable e-signing world for your particular use cases. That's it from my end for today.
Thank you, Jörg. And Bob Larrivee from AIIM, your closing thoughts today.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you everybody for being with us and staying with us, and to Jörg and the folks at Kofax from Lexmark for underwriting this session. I think Jörg is right. Why wait? It's doable. You can eliminate paper from processes, and one of the things to consider is the signature. Since most people print to sign, and there really is no reason, I think the time is now to take those steps and start moving in that direction. See how e-signing can really help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. For AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you at our next webinar. Have a good afternoon.